So today, I think is going to be probably one of the most difficult classes I've ever given when it comes to the concepts, because to really understand this concept of Malchut, you have to first understand all the others, and because Malchut kind of interchanges and intertwines in all of the other ideas. So let's start. The last of the 10 Sefirot is the Sefirah of Malchut. What does Malchut means? It means kingship. It means royalty. Now, in the teachings of Kabbalah, it explains that Malchut is directly bound with the first Sefirah, which is Chachma. Now, how is it possible that the last Sefirah can be bound with the first Sefirah? How is the last emotional trait bound with the first emotional trait? How does that process work? That's essentially what we're going to have to figure out. So now, in the terminology, I'll go through the terminology, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards about it. In the terminology, it says the following: Na'utz tchilasan b'sofan v'sofan b'tchilasan. That the beginning is wedged in the end, and the end is wedged in the beginning. So, that is, there's a special association between the emotional trait, the Sefirah of Malchut, of kingship, of royalty, which is the last of all of the Sefirot, and the first one, which is Chachma, which is loving kindness. So, let's try to understand it, and then we'll go through it. Chachma, how do we explain it? How do we explain loving kindness? We said that it's the element of conception, right?
You said loving kindness.
Did I say loving kindness? I meant the element of conception. Sorry, I take that back. Chachma, the element of conception, which doesn't yet have any definable form. So the element of conception is koach ma, right? The potential of what? It has absolutely no actual physical form. It's just the potential for anything. So, Chachma, which is the potential for what? Which has no defined form, is the abode with which God is able to identify the epitome of what we're going to call bitul, humility. If we go back and try to understand what it truly means to be a human being, what it truly means to be relational, what it truly means to be one with this universe, in order to try to allow someone else into your life, in order to try to allow someone else into your world, you have to have some sense of humility. You have to check yourself at the door. Now, you're going to say, well, I don't want to let that person into my life. Well, that's not your choice whether or not to let someone else into your life. That is the purpose for which we're in this world. We're in this world to be relational. We're not supposed to be hermits sitting on a mountain.
Can we go even a step beyond that and say no matter how much you like to pretend that you're not in a relational state, you always are?
That's right.
In reality,
no matter how much you want to pretend you're not in a relational state, you are always in a relational state.
Always.
You have to be. And if you're not in a relational state, then you're probably fighting that relational state. So you're either in a state of not being relational, or you're in a state of being relational.
That's it. So if you're not embracing the relational aspect of your existence, you're basically in denial.
So if you don't embrace the relational element of your existence, you're basically in denial. Exactly. So what we have to do in order to embrace that relational experience is we have to check our ego at the door. Well, that's not easy, because I have feelings, and I have needs, and I have desires, and I have wants. I don't want to just check my ego at the door. But in order to even start the entire process of understanding these character traits, to understand what we call the Sefirot, what we're saying is basically, if the first and the last are intertwined, it kind of almost becomes a circle in its own way. It becomes a process that can kind of refill and go back over and over and over again. And how does that process work? What is the mechanism that we use to define that process? Humility. That's the mechanism. Humility dwells only in places that express this idea of what we call bittul of humility. So now, chachma, conception. Since it's not yet formed and comprehended, therefore it is what? A vessel for God. Chachma, conception, is bittul. It is humility. It actually is humility in its essential form. Actually, if you think about a koach ma, the potential for what? Chachma can also be read as koach ma, the potential for what? The potential for what is the combination of those two words, koach ma. Since it is unknown what form chachma is, within it is the potential for everything. It has within it the potential of any state. So therefore, the essential nature of it is humility. Now, Malchut, which is really what we're talking about today, has a similar quality. This idea of royalty or kingship. Malchut, the Kabbalah says, has nothing of its own. Les lo migarma klum. It has no flavor of its own. All it does is receive from the other 9 Sefirot, the other 9 traits above it, and convey it to the next stage. It becomes essentially like the brainstem. It receives all the conductors from all the other parts of the brain, so to speak, and it conveys it to the rest of the body. So it is the conductor that takes all of the other Sefirot and conveys it to the next stage.
So it's like pretty much like ultimate Gevurah.
So Malchut is similar to a funnel in that it transfers things from one side to the other. This is, again, this idea of bittul, of humility. Being a funnel and vessel for God without, and this is so crucial, without mixing in human understanding and ego. Thinking about that. Just think about that a second. Being a vessel for God without mixing in your own human understanding.
So Chachma is human understanding?
Chachma is the beginning, is the potential for human understanding.
But we consider it human understanding.
But what we want from you now is something, we don't want you to, don't mix yourself into it. If you want to try to find that pure element, that pure essential part of who you are, don't mix yourself into it.
It's interesting that Kabbalah gets the name of Malchut for this, because when we think of Malchut and royalty, the last thing we think of is humility.
Exactly. Can you imagine that
Full of
Kabbalah
everything
is
Even if it's a
thick,
great king.
is putting it into Malchut, and we're going to find out why it is royalty. It actually is, and we're gonna uncover that and unpack that in a few minutes. So now, this is exactly why the Kabbalah says that Chachma and Malchut are wedged within each other. This idea of conception and this idea of royalty, they're actually wedged within each other. Now, how does this aspect of Malchut, which is humility, relate to royalty? The question that Fred just asked. How does that work? It would seem, as Fred just said, that royalty is the antithesis of bittul. Royalty is anything but humility. So now, what Kabbalah will do is analyze this idea of royalty. Let's look at a king. A king becomes a king by having subjects with whomever he rules. A king isn't a king over ants and bugs. Why can't the king be a king over ants and bugs? Because they don't serve his purpose. There's no way that an ant is a wonderful soldier. They're amazing with what they can do if you've ever seen an ant farm. But they're not going to serve the king's purpose. The king I can't just say, I am a king over all the cups on the table. Because the cups on the table in their current state are not able to fulfill my purpose. So I can't be a king over them. You see, there needs to be subjects that can fulfill the purpose of the king in order for the king to be the king. So now, just think about this as I analyze this. What's more important, the king or the subjects? I'm just putting that question out there for you. What's more important, the king or the subjects? The king is not king without the subjects, and the subjects are not subjects without the king. But just think about that a second. So now, a king wants recognition. A king wants dominion. The ants, the cups on the table, don't have that recognition. They don't have those qualities. They don't have the ability for the king to have dominion. I mean, I could say that I have dominion over the cups on the table, but it's a fallacy. Humans do. What we have is we have the ability. Why? Because in a kind of a state, I know it sounds crazy, but we could also be the king. So by me coronating the king as the king, it's me saying, it's my bittul, it's my humility. I'm able to coronate the king as the king. So therefore, humans are able to satisfy the king's desire. Thinking of a king this way leads to the conclusion that a king on his own without human subjects is actually worthless. Because the king is not a king without having the human subjects. Since kingship and royalty are dependent on humans, this aspect of Malchut is expressive of true bittul, of true humility. Humility of whom? The idea would be, you would think simply humility of the subjects, not humility of the king. Now watch this. Imagine the king soliciting his subjects to want him. What would everyone do? Excuse me, everyone. I'm sorry, I have an announcement to make. I am your king. Can you please accept me? Imagine someone standing up in the middle of Sherbrooke. In England, they have Speaker's Corner, right? Yeah. So imagine he gets his milk crate and he stands up at Speaker's Corner and he says, "Hello, all you subjects. You are now my subjects. Please accept me as your king." What is going to happen? Every single person who's there is going to for sure want another king. Actually, I'll take any king but you. Why are they seeking another king? Because royalty and kingship is a voluntary pursuit that the people want. There's no way for you to become the king unless the people want you to be the king. It's such an insane concept if you think about what royalty really is. I can't get up tomorrow and say, "I'm king." They're going to say, "Who thinks you're the king?" "Well, you think you're so great that you're the king." Be a little humble.
So this recognizes that even a king, as we think of a king as being totalitarian, even a king is the expression of the will of the people, the will of the subjects, to create something and to be ruled by something that is called a king or a kingdom. So before the king really only embodies a very important symbolic place in the minds of all the subjects, right? And no matter how great the king.
But it takes the subjects. The point is that it takes the subjects to accept the king in order for the king. The king cannot say, "I'm king." It's the subjects that need to coronate the king as the king. So, who has the bittul? Who has the humility? It's the king who has the humility. And the king who has more humility will end up with more followers. You follow? I'm talking about a quintessential king. I'm not talking about, don't look at kings throughout history as examples. This is the ideal of what Kabbalah calls the true king. The king with the most humility will have the most followers. What's the example of the true king? Do you know who we use as the prototype for the true king? King David. Why? Because King David is a shepherd. He doesn't come from a royal family. But Samuel gets a prophecy, and Hashem tells Samuel to coronate David as the king, and then David becomes the king. So they asked David, how do you merit being the king? You know what he said? He said, because I know who the real king is. And it's David's children who end up becoming the kings of Israel, all the way down the line to the Messiah, who also comes from the lineage of David. And all the while, even as David is the warrior, and even as he is fighting the battles on behalf of the people, what is he doing? He's praising. He's praising God. Warrior by day, poet by night. It's not just he started off knowing who the real king is. Every single step of the way, he's continuing to focus on who is the true king, even while he is the king of Israel. And that's why, if you look at our prayers, majority of our prayers are the prayers of David. There are many other prayers that exist in the world. They're good prayers from good people. But majority of the prayers that we say every single day are the Psalms, are the Tehillim, are the prayers of David. Because David exemplifies that humility.
It's interesting. So it's like a recognition that for the king to be a true king, the king has to not be focused on the order that he imposes. He has to be aware that he's part of a bigger order.
That's right. In order for the king to be a true king, the king is not allowed to focus on the order, but rather that he imposes, but rather that he is part of a higher sense. You know, the Rebbe spoke about this idea of asay lecha rab. You have to find yourself a mentor, a teacher, a rabbi. And so people ask the Rebbe, how do I know who's going to be my teacher, my mentor? So the Rebbe said, there's one important element that person needs to have. You have to ask that person, and who's your teacher? That person has to see themselves as a link in the chain. If you are able to be a leader over others, you too must have a leader. And that, as long as you have someone that you can check your ego at the door with and be truly humble, then you will continue to give good counsel. You'll be able to be a leader over someone else because you too have someone you check your ego at the door. If you've never checked your ego at the door with anyone, if you can't be truthful and honest and bare your soul to anyone, then you don't have the right to tell anyone else or give anyone else advice. Because true advice and advice that's going to be accepted by the individual is only going to come from someone who's humble. But more than humble doesn't mean that you have to be fully humble. You have to also be humble. No one asked you to be completely humble. We just asked you to be also humble. That there needs to be a time in your life that you have humility, that you check your ego at the door. And it's important because I think in our society, in our world, we're constantly looking at extremes. You know, am I this? I'm that? Am I, political extremes and in humanity extremes? No, it's the also. Are you also humble? Do you have the ability at some point in your life, in your day, in your week, to check your ego at the door and to be humble for someone? And to not go and make it a survey. I'm going to go ask for advice, but I'm going to go to this rabbi and that rabbi. I'm going to see, who gives me the best answer, and I'll make a survey, which a lot of people do today. But the ability to truly check your ego at the door is, I'm going to go to this person because I think this person is going to give me the best counsel, and I'm going to listen to whatever they say, even if I don't like what they say. And that's hard. That's really, really hard. So now I think we have a better picture that the true strength of the Sefirah of Malchut is a feeling of humility. There was once a Hasidic Rebbe. He had many followers, and a mitnagid, someone who opposed him, told him that his ego and his pride is what pursued him in having so many great followers. The mitnagid, the opposer, said, if you were truly humble, he says to him, you would make a public announcement on Friday night in the synagogue when all of your Hasidim, when all of your followers are present, telling everyone that you aren't a great teacher, that you aren't a great Rebbe, that you aren't a great leader, and that they should all go home. And they have no reason to be in the synagogue with a simpleton. So the Rebbe said, you're right, I'm going to do exactly that. The next Friday night, right after the prayers, he gets up and he makes an announcement. He said, dear Hasidim, everyone present, I want you to go home because I'm not a great Rebbe. I'm just a simple person, and you have no reason to be in shul, in the synagogue, with such a simple person. Guess what? The following week, he had twice as many followers. This is the epitome of royalty. There's an old saying, I don't know if the story is true, but the story goes is that there's these two yeshiva students who are sitting at two ends of the study hall, very late at night. And the one guy is saying, "Oh, ich bin a garnished, oh, I'm a nothing." And the other one is screaming even louder, "Oh, ich bin a garnished, oh, I'm a nothing." And the other one is even screaming louder, "Oh, I'm a nothing." And the other one's saying, "Oh, I'm a nothing, oh, I'm a nothing." And they're constantly back and forth. Who can scream louder? Who's a bigger nothing? This guy walks in, simple guy, and he's so inspired. Wow, look at these two scholars sitting at 2 o'clock in the morning, screaming how much they're nothing. So he sits down and he closes his eyes and he says, "Dear God in heaven, oh, I'm a nothing." They both look at each other and they say, "That guy's really a nothing."
It's funny, you know that there's a Sephardi version of that exact same story.
I'm sure there's probably many different versions of it.
They say the way they say it in French is very funny, but basically it's like it's the same thing. It's two people saying, "I'm a nothing,
Yeah.
I'm a nothing, I'm a nothing," and then the third person, no, you know what? I'm really not even the nothing. And the one turns to there and goes, "Who does this guy think he is?"
Exactly. Who does this guy think he
It's
is?
like, in other words, like if there's only humility, it's a sign that there probably is a little bit of ego there, right? Because it's like virtue.
It's like, and it's also,
I'm perfect. I'm so humble.
we
I'm
actually,
not a human being. I'm just perfect.
in Kabbalah,
Yeah.
we say that's false humility. There's an idea of false humility, and it's very important because people can get caught up in what's called false humility.
Yeah, absolutely. Very
So,
easy. It's
what
virtue
we're-
signaling.
Exactly, virtue signaling. So this notion of bitul, this notion of false humility, of real humility, not false humility, is an integral part of character. It's an integral part of who we are. When a teacher communicates information in a condensed form, after deliberation on which way they should actually convey it, and has focused on the student, causing possibly a bond between teacher and student. And all of this is in the teacher's perspective. But to truly, as a teacher, reach the student, the teacher has to put themselves into the student's position. The giver has to put themselves into the shoes of the recipient. Don't judge someone until you walk a mile in their shoes, because that way you have their shoes and you're a mile away. The teacher can't literally feel the student's needs unless what? Unless he strips himself from the way of thinking of his own and starts thinking more in terms of the student. There's absolutely no way that the teacher is able to really, truly understand the students unless they put themselves into the student's shoes. There's no way that the counselor can truly understand the recipient until they put themselves in the recipient's shoes. How do you do that? What ends up happening is this courageous act and this mindset that the teacher undergoes manifests this sense of humility. The teacher is able to put themselves aside, which includes their own perspective, which includes their own understanding, which includes their own pride, their own authority, literally check themselves and every preconceived idea that they had at the door in order to truly convey the message. And that's bittul. That is humility. And the funny thing is about it, is the student's going to feel it. The student is going to feel what kind of teacher they're going to be able to accept the information from. Because at the end of the day, the student also has an ego. And the student also has a perspective. And you're asking, what you're asking, if you want to convey a new message to someone, you're asking them to check their ego at the door. You're asking them not to bring their preconceived ideas, to come with an open heart, to come with an open mind. That's what you're asking of the person. So if you're asking of that person in your class to do that, then you have to be able to do the same thing yourself. As a giver. Because the point is that the teacher already knows the information. If I wanted to come here and talk to myself and just had you sitting around, that would be very nice. It's wonderful. Actually, I want to tell you, and it always bothered me because I had teachers over the years that said, I'm really talking to myself. No, you're not talking to yourself. You're talking to yourself. We'd send you to a mental institution.
That's right.
You're talking to us. And put yourself in our shoes.
It's funny because you see the extremes. You see the extremes. Let's say in the when we talk about like a French educational system, which like it's not about the student, it's about the teacher. The teacher talks the whole time. The students just shut up. You just have to understand and follow what the teacher is saying. Like very, very authoritarian, very, very magistral, like very top-down kind of model, right? So that's
the classic top-down model.
Classic top-down model. That's the extreme where it's like it's only about the teacher. It's not about the students. The students have to conform and contort themselves to the teacher.
Right.
That's one model. But today you have the other extreme where it's all about the student. And you have all these tools now online, rate my teacher, and it's
exactly.
like the students now, it's like a consumer experience. It's like this teacher now, you know what, he's designed too hard, or one time he made a comment I didn't like, or whatever.
And the teachers, so the teachers aren't checking, and it's a great example today. The teachers aren't checking their ego at the door. They're checking everything at the door because they're afraid they're going to get a negative rating from the students. And as a result, the educational experience, you see, in Judaism, we don't want edukara, the conveying of a message. We want chinuch. We want dedication. We want mind and heart and soul. And being a teacher is a very difficult thing. You have to bring 100% of yourself to the experience for the student's benefit. You have to bring 100% of yourself to the experience. And the student is going to feel that. The student is going to feel that commitment. The student is going to feel that self-sacrifice that is coming from the teacher. And how is the student going to reciprocate it? By totally becoming one with the teacher. By totally trying to embody and to understand fully, without ego, what the teacher is trying to teach. So in other words, the bonding that we spoke about last week, that the Sefirah of Yesod, which is bonding, the bonding that the bonding trait creates is very much real. What is the bonding? The bonding is from the teacher's perspective still, in this analogy. He, or that particular teacher, is bonding to the student. And the teacher is causing the student, as a result, to bond with him. But Malchut is very different than Yesod, than that bonding experience. What is Malchut? The student is now causing the teacher to connect and dedicate themselves to the student. It's coming from the student's vantage point. The remarkable thing is that the stimulus is actually part of the teacher's real feelings. This is the ultimate of humility, that a sensation of commitment to others generated by others, yet felt within a person in a manner that allows the outside stimulus to drive him and guide him. A sensation of commitment to others that is actually generated by others, but it's felt within a person in a manner that allows for outside stimulus to drive them and to guide them.
So basically, Malchus is just like, it's the ideal state of like where you're bittul.
It's the ideal state of humility. Malchut is the ideal state of humility. Now, these two approaches would be, if you go back to our previous classes, they will be other examples of what we called milmaila lemata, from above to below, and milmata lemaila, from below to above. So let's explain this like this. Let's go back to Yesod, to this idea of bonding. The bonding in comparison to the Malchut, to the royalty, would be what? From below to above. Milmata lemaila. It's generated by the teacher's focus and bond to the students. That's how the experience is generated. It's a teacher-centered experience.
From below to above?
Yeah.
Well, teacher would be above, right?
Yes.
From
That's
above
right.
to below.
From above to below.
Okay,
Malchut, in comparison, would be the opposite. It's generated by the student being there as a primary target. So now let's take ourselves out of the teacher-student experience. And what does that have to do with me and you? Looking at Malchut within the human character, it's the element of humility that best allows a person to feel royal. If you want to feel like a princess, be humble. I know everyone's all the little girls are all into being a princess. If you want to feel like a princess, be humble.
They're not that kind of princess. They're a bossy princess.
Royalty isn't any one specific virtue. Rather, it's a feeling of being regal that creates within all of a person's character the royal feeling. How do we compare this to? What is Kabbalah going to compare this to now? It's going to compare this to Tainug. Remember the idea of Tainug that we discussed? What was Tainug? Does anyone remember? No. What was Tainug? Tainug literally translates as pleasure.
Okay.
But how did Kabbalah describe Tainug? But it probably was about 6 or 7 weeks ago that we spoke about it.
Or uniqueness.
More. So tell me, you said our uniqueness, what else? Tainug. Our pleasure. No, not taiva. Tainug. What is pleasure?
The essence of a person as it manifests itself in the laws of nature.
That's right. The essence of a person as it manifests itself in the laws of
I
nature.
didn't remember it. It's just an edit fine.
Does it have to
That's
do
what
anything
happened.
with
So, a person can't describe to another their particular delights in a manner that the other person could actually say, I know why and how this person feels during the fulfillment of their delights. The only thing the other person can say is, I realize that this person has been impacted by their delights. I can see that their minds and their hearts and their other character traits are totally uplifted in a way that never before has been this way. The reason for this observation is that Tanug, the pleasure, impacts all parts of one's being without having one specific abode. It doesn't sit in the mind. It doesn't just sit in the heart. Pleasure is really, it affects every single part of who the person is. And the same is true with regards to Malchut, this 10th attribute. Malchut impacts this royalty, this trait impacts all of the other 9 character traits. And the way it does it is through royalty, which is by having the true feeling of humility. Humility, as far as the character is concerned, means to realize that God is everything, and that the person is God's subject, and that our purpose is to be here to fulfill his desire. And when we accomplish this transformation, we feel royal in a very humble way. This feeling permeates all parts of the being. Subsequently, people see in the person a new person. Think about the other 6 emotional traits as the 6 days of the week. What's the 7th day of the week? The 7th day of the week is Shabbat. What is Shabbat? Shabbat is the day of rest. Rest from what? Rest from creation. Why? Why do we rest on Shabbat? Because we are mimicking God. The same way God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, we too create for 6 days and rested on the seventh. What do we call the Shabbat mostly? We call it the Shabbat Queen. It's feminine. Huh? Malka. This idea of Malchut is completely feminine. Malchut is the aspect of character that is a vessel for humility, in that it recognizes that tooting one's horn, even though that horn might be great and wonderful, is only limiting experience and refining the 9 other character traits. All these character traits are the development of the self. Malchut is the development of the non-ego drive within the character. This is the reason that God chooses Malchut as the final of the traits, as the final of the Sefirot. It culminates God's true royalty. When God expresses himself through all subjects, including the human species, this is his greatest pleasure. Malchut is the element within the character that accomplishes this.
It's funny because we always try to also connect the concepts of the finite and the infinite, or the limited and the unlimited. And the humility principle is, no matter how great the person or the society or whatever, no matter how great the internal kind of entity is, without humility, it is limited. It's always going to be limited. No matter how great.
No matter how great it is, without humility, it becomes limited. Exactly.
Something else. But you will always be limited if you don't have the quality of humility. You will not have that openness to transcending.
It's simple. If you think you know everything, you're never going to learn.
That's right. That's the essence of Malchut.
There are some people going, I know everything, you're not going to teach me anything new.
And it's also to see how that is wed into Chokhmah. And that before you can have that koach ma, before you can have that intuition of there's something there that I don't know, you have to be humble.
That's right.
You have to create an environment of humility. Otherwise, that chokhmah experience will not happen.
It's impossible for the potential for what? That not only with a chokhmah experience, the whole creative process won't happen. If you want to be creative, if you want to invent something, if you want to find something, nothing can let's say the person is the vessel. If your vessel is filled to the top with garbage, there's no way you can let anything else in it. You're just going to be filled with garbage. So if you think that you know everything, there's no way you can allow for something new. Because your vessel is completely filled. So what do you have to do in order to allow something new to happen? For that process of change to happen, you have to empty the vessel.
It's Moshe and Aaron say "Vanachnu ma,"
That's right.
and he said, if you ask the questions, and just by asking questions, you're being humble.
Just by asking the question, you're being humble. That is koach ma, the potential for what. It's not just the potential for what, it's the what question. The potential for what is really asking the question.
It's true. When you're asking a question, what you're doing, in a sense, is if it's a proper question, you're right. There's different kinds of questions.
No, saying if you're asking the question as a personal experience, if you're asking the question to be able to help build your character and become a better person,
right. If you're asking
from a place of humility, from a place of humility.
It comes from a place of biddle, no?
Yes, exactly.
You're already admitting that you don't know the answer.
Exactly.
Right? So you're creating a bit of emptiness. You're creating a space. And you're like, hey.
Right.
I'm
So
looking
if you
for something.
imagine this experience.
Yeah, I'm looking for something.
Imagine this experience. You ask a question, and by asking the question, you're creating a void. You're creating an empty vessel because you're saying, there's something missing in my life. And I think that's the essence of relationships as well. People who are looking for a relationship, but they're not willing to empty their vessel. If you don't need the relationship, you're not going to have it.
It's like
If you don't see something missing in your life, you should not try to find somebody to
But
get
don't
married
say,
to.
Rabbi, today that if you need something, that means you're an incomplete individual, and it means that you're needy, and you're not supposed to. You're
But-
supposed to be completely
But you're
self-reliant.
not. But at that point is that you're not needy. You're humble. There's a very big difference between neediness, being a leech,
Are you
and
saying
being
that
humble.
Me being satisfied with myself is egotistical? Yes.
No, but
Right.
you can still be
I'm
a
going
strong
with the
character.
thought process
The
of
point is
being
that
individual.
humility is royalty. You can still be
It
the
is.
princess,
Yeah.
and you can also be
Thank
humble.
you, Rabbi. It's very important.
I've read it.
You can still be the princess and still be humble. That's a very powerful idea.
Rabbi, I've
Yeah.
read in some books, like lots of commentaries on the Zohar. It says you wake up and you begin anew every day.
Yeah, of
You don't keep on like.
But
Yeah.
if you want to, and when I'm teaching, I see there's different ways of learning, and there's some people who walk in, and they have their arms folded, and they're just, okay, what are you gonna? Do you have anything good to teach me today? I don't know. And there are some people who walk in, and there's an openness, like, what? How can I do this? And even if it's a selfish openness, it could be like, how am I going to be able to internalize his ideas so I can share it with someone else? Or how am I going to internalize his ideas so I can become a better person? That's okay. It's still okay. I mean, it's not ideal, but it's okay because you're still in that void. What you want to do is create the emptiness in your vessel. And that can only come from a certain walking in, checking your ego at the door, and having a certain sense of humility. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting also is that Malchut is in the middle of all the Sefirot, but it's not connected. It's not a triad. It's not connected because it has within it every single thing. So think about the Malchut of Bina, of conceptualization, or the Malchut of application, or the Malchut of loving kindness. Each one of these traits, if you want to really truly express a real character trait, you need to be able to have humility. And not false humility, true humility. True humility and the ability to be able to accept. So the question now I'm going to ask you before, who's more important, the king or the subjects? So if the subjects check their ego at the door, and the king also checks his ego, or the queen checks her ego at the door, who becomes more important? The king or queen checking their ego, or the subjects checking their ego? Think about it for a second. Don't just jump to an answer. Which one is more important? So go back to the teacher and the student. If the teacher walking in and checking their ego at the door, or the student walking in and checking their ego at the door, which one is more
I think
important?
it's more important for the teacher to check his ego.
Can you be the students, but it's because of the teacher? Like his
I think it's more important for the teacher to check his ego because the teacher has the power in that particular. So the risks of them not checking their ego are always there for everybody.
So if the teacher doesn't check their ego at the door, the students won't either.
Right.
If the king or queen doesn't check their ego, the subjects can't.
That's right.
Your defense mechanism goes up because there's a good reason for it to go up. Your defense mechanism isn't going up because you decided that you just want to, you walk around the room. You have experience, So it's much more crucial for the king or queen, or for the teacher, or for the leader, or for the counselor, or for the psychologist, or whoever it is that's going to be giving advice, to check their ego at the door, because otherwise they're not creating a space for the person to be able to fill. Their job is to fill the empty space the person is creating. So they have to allow for that process to happen. They have to allow for the person to walk in and want that their space is going to be emptied, and that it will be filled with something new. So who's more important, the king or queen, or the subjects? I say the subjects are more important.
It's more important that they
Or
do
who's more
it,
important
but
that
it's
they
more
check their ego?
important that,
Yeah.
what he
That's right.
said, but at the end, the more important is that the subjects do it,
Yes,
but what
of
he
course.
said.
Of course. Like, is it who's more important in general, or who's more important that they check their ego?
Who's more important?
For sure, the students or
The subjects.
The people. Yeah, of course.
Because it could be, and I'm not talking quintessential now, I'm just talking in reality. It could be that it's the reason why the teacher checked their ego at the door is because of the students. And that allowed the teacher to go through the process of doing that as well.
The ultimate point of the teaching is the learning.
The best way to learn is to teach.
But what I said is the opposite. It's like the ultimate point, the whole raison d'etre of the teaching is the learning, right? It's the fact that 40 people are going to learn something from this one person, and they're going to go in a million different directions, and who knows, they might be able to take that learning to the next level. After
Exactly.
That, right? It's part of
Exactly.
Yeah, except that the students also, if it's a good teacher and is open to learning from the students, can also learn something from the students, even if it's, a different approach but there's always a relationship. It's never one
Exactly.
way.
Going back to the beginning, it starts off with the desire for the relationship. The teacher needs to desire the relationship. The student needs to desire the relationship. Because if we're not relational, then we're not doing anything. The whole entire purpose of the back and forth is relational. And as Fred said, to have the old-fashioned frontal learning where I'm going to speak and you're going to shut up, that's not good. But to have this openness where all we're just going to do is have a conversation is also not good. There needs to be the balance of the two, which means it's true the teacher can learn from the student, but if the student is constantly, I want to tell you I'm a conversational narcissist, and I'm going to bring some idea of something that happened to me some other time. Well, no, let's stick to the point. We're here to talk a particular topic. We're here to talk Malchut today. Now, the balance of the Malchut is within that conversation. We now presented the ideas, and there's a back and forth once the ideas are presented. So now, we together can grow to the next level. So here it is. We presented all the ideas. Now we have the ability to have this conversation and to grow to the next level together, which is something we can't do alone. The entire process of chavruta, which is the Jewish way of learning, which is the yeshiva, the fundamental Jewish way, is we go back and forth. We're focusing on the text. We're not creating our own text. The text we have, the text we discussed, we know what it says. Now it's our job together to try to figure out how the both of us can become better together through the learning of this text. That's our job.
Yeah, and that's why that ideology that I was kind of mocking a little bit of, like the individual being completely self-fulfilled and self-contained and whatever, you can add a million adjectives, right? That I am sort of self-sufficient. That ideal of self-sufficiency, of that, negates the possibility of relationship, because
That's right.
The only way you're going to be able to have a relationship with another person is if that person gives you something that you already have decided that you want for yourself. So you instrumentalize the other person. You cannot have you don't have the space within yourself to let the other come in.
I believe what you're saying is a fundamental. That is the fundamental. That what's happened to our world today is that, and I'm using a generalization because we're here, I have no choice but to use a generalization, but a lot of women don't have that need anymore to be in a relationship. And men as well. So because we've become so self-sufficient, we don't have any need to be in a relationship. As a result, the relationship doesn't exist. Relationships can only exist if there's a bond. There needs to be a yesod. There needs to be a bond for the relationship to exist. There needs to be a need. I need to need you, and you need to need me. Like, for example, in this particular relationship right here, we have a relationship. The relationship is you're looking at me as the one who has learned this material before, so I can share this with you. And I'm looking to you as the one who is going to receive the material, and we can have a discussion afterwards. If we didn't have the desire to both be here learning and to have this relationship, there'd be no reason why we'd be here, and there'd be no purpose to being here.
Like Leanna said, there's an expression today that's very, very popular. Relationships suck.
Right. Relationships suck, right.
That's it. It is what
And
it is.
and if you're
like, yeah, that's true.
if you're going to come to the room, if you're going to come to the conversation, if you're going to come to the date, if you're going to come to the relationship, saying relationships suck, saying, or even worse, I'll tell you what's worse than that. What's worse than that is I have to protect myself. So I'm going to come to the date saying every single reason why this is not going to work. And guess what? I become a self-fulfilling prophet. Of course it's not going to work because you said it wasn't going to work. What do you think? All of a sudden it's going to work because you decided, oh wow, you know what? He grew on me. I saw something there. No, you're never going to see anything. He's never going to grow on you. You have to walk in checking your ego at the door. There's no way to get into a relationship without humility.
But you know what, this process of people saying, I need to protect myself, or they come to the date with their guns out, that reality becomes, it's part of a negative feedback loop.
Exactly.
In a society where everybody is super on their guard, doesn't trust anybody else, focuses on themselves, my happiness, my fulfillment, I don't need to depend on anybody, I don't need this, I don't need that. So in a society like that, everybody is experienced as a potential threat, as a potential hostile, and so, whoa, if I'm gonna get attacked by 20 people today, well, I'm gonna have my guns out.
Exactly.
So it becomes
And
part
if
of
you
a
walk
feedback
into the
loop, you know?
date with guns blazing, what do you think's going to happen? You're going to shoot somebody.
That's right.
And probably they're going to see your guns and they're going to shoot you back.
That's right.
So what do you expect? All this hostility is just building on one another.
I think it also comes from that, like, people, they think they know everything, so they already, like, kind of, okay, I know everything and you know nothing, basically.
Right.
And I think that's one of the reasons that...
You know that there's a thing in behavioral psychology, it's very known, it's a systematic error that we make in our perception, and Kahneman calls it, what you see is all there is, okay? So it's the tendency to consider that the only things that are real are the things that I can see, or that I can understand. And everybody has that, it's like we're wired that way. It's like, what you see is all there is. And it's not true, right? Because there's so many things that you don't see that are real, nonetheless. But in order to start to develop a relationship with the things that you don't see, you have to have humility. If you have no humility, what you see is all there is becomes reinforced because it's really all about what I can see.
And I think that it's so common. This mistake is so common where we all think that what we see is it. What do you mean I saw it? What they say, seeing is believing. Seeing is not believing. Seeing is a version.
Exactly. It's a data point.
It's a data point. It's a version.
Yeah.
That's what it really is. It's not the truth. It's your truth for this moment.
That's right.
And it could be that it's interesting because I always wonder when they show you the movie on the screen, or even whatever screen that you're looking at, what's on the other side? There's more than the screen. The screen is not capturing the whole thing.
That's
Your
where the
eyes,
cinema's gonna come in. You're gonna turn around.
exactly. We need the 360 cinema. I want to see like what's everything else. And they're able to show you things on screens today, special effects, that because there was at the end of one of these animations that were like stop motion animations. So at the end of the animation, they showed like the whole process of them like moving all the characters. And it was really amazing. Like, they kind of pulled out, I forgot which animation it was, but it was so brilliantly done, where you see these two guys and saying, look, I wonder if there's a whole world out there. And slowly you see the screen is panning out, and you see more and more and more. Then you see, like, really, they're just these two little things on a table, and there's these people over them that are kind of moving them, and it just goes on and on and on. And you see still the whole stop motion animation going on at the same speed, but you can see them, like, really, like, pushing out and seeing the entire room, and really this entire animation you just saw was a little tiny little scene that they had on a table, and these guys were just moving these characters.
But to do that, you had to separate yourself from the direct thing that you were seeing in that moment, which is analogous to humility.
Exactly.
It's separating yourself.
And that is the ultimate level of humility. That's exactly what Malchut is. You have to separate yourself and realize that there is a bigger picture, that King David becomes the quintessential king because he says what? He says, I know who the real king is. And all the while, he's constantly praising and talking to the real king. And he knows that the reason why he can be a king of flesh and blood is because he checked his ego at the door, because he has that humility. And that's a very difficult process for us in our world, because it means that we have to become vulnerable. It means that we have to allow for life to happen, and we can't always have our defense mechanisms up. We got to put our defense mechanisms down, and that's really, really tough.
And I would add that it gets more and more difficult the more a person achieves. Because the more things you know and the more things you achieve, the more there is to look at. The more justification you have for not being humble, and
Yeah.
the more limiting it becomes,
Absolutely.
right?
The more justification you have for not being humble, and the more limiting it becomes.
At the same
It's
time.
much easier because experience is going to do that to you also. Look, you have a couple that's married for a long time, and they've constantly been pushing each other's buttons. And you know, when you're married, you know how to push someone's buttons, and you know how to, as I call, fight dirty. You can, you know how to get to the person. You can really get to them. I'm going to show you.
That's only when you're married.
Well, because when you're married, you know that relationship kind of creates that. It also could be in a business relationship. It could be in other relationships as well. And so it's really easy when you know how to push the other person's buttons really, really well to enjoy that kind of thrill of being in control. That's fake royalty. That's fake Malchut. That's fake kingship. You are trying to have the upper hand by pushing the other one down. That's a bunch of kids in a playground. And so what has to happen in order for that cycle to stop is they both have to say, we're going to check our ego at the door. I know everything about you. I've been married to you for this amount of years. I know what's going to push your buttons, but I'm not going to do that consciously because I care about you. And if they're not going to walk in with that idea of checking their egos at the door and caring about one another, then they're not going to get anywhere. There's nowhere to go. There's two stubborn people will not be able to be in a relationship. It's not a relationship. It's a self-serving something. Definitely not relationship. Relationship means I'm here 100% for you and you're here 100% for me, but not just in the nice euphoric, princess way. In the real way, that we're truly able to check ourselves at the door. And sometimes I say to couples that I see, you need a hard reset. Okay, fine. This is what you've been doing. Do you want to be married or don't you want to be married? Do you want to be in a relationship or don't you want to be in a relationship? This is not therapy. I can hear all your stories from today till tomorrow. But the point is that you are in a vicious cycle. And until you are able to experience Malchut, until you're able to check your ego at the door and say, I am here for the relationship, because that is the purpose for which I'm here. You are the other half of my soul, literally. It's not just this euphoric idea. It's really that I am half and you are half, and together we make a whole. So our union is a whole, which means without you, I am only half of the best person I can be.
I wonder if people's egos will let them get away with that idea now in 2019.
I don't know.
And I know the answer for a lot of people.
Unfortunately.
Is no.
Yeah.
There's no way. Like, people don't have the trust on
And one of
another human being.
the issues is people aren't getting married, but those who are getting married, they're getting married much later. Mm-hmm. So they already have a lot of life experience. They already have a lot of preconceived ideas, and they already have a lot of stuff that they're set on.
Well, they have a very specific idea of what they want in a relationship and precisely why. And
absolutely,
they have a very sort of already predefined role for the person that is eventually going to fill that role. So it leaves only a very, very small possibility for somebody to plug in and to play that role.
I mean, literally, what happens? 90% of my life is figured out. I'll give you 10%. I mean, I'm being nice. I'm really being nice, because really I should only give you 5%. So I'm going to give you 5% of my life. That's not a relationship.
What are the chances that another human being is
if you're not willing to
artificially contort themselves to fit that 3%?
No, and I've said this to a lot of older singles. If you are not willing to clear out half of your life physically, then don't even try. Like if you look in your closet, you're like, there's no space for someone else's clothes in here.
That's true. That's true.
And that's a physical way. I'm not even talking emotional or mental or spiritual. I'm saying physically, if there's no space for someone else in your life, there's no space for someone else in your life. We're all one the same. We are the same person. And sometimes you have to literally make space for someone else in your life in order for that person to be there.
And also the time dimension, right? It's like, my life is full.
Yeah, like, oh, well, okay, well, I'm going to set you up. Well, oh, well, I can't go there. I can't go that. I can fit them in between this and that, really. So that's how important is this in your life? The Talmud says,
People fill their lives, but then if they meet someone, then they make them.
Yeah, that person has to be
you would
perfect
think
to feel
so.
the other stuff.
You would think so. But the Talmud says you have to look for that person like you lost something. You ever lose your keys? You ever lose your phone, heaven forbid? How do you look for it? You go meshugi. You go crazy. You turn the whole house over. You go and start calling. Sam, I was at your house yesterday that I happened to leave my... Look at how much time and effort you're going to put to find your keys or to find your phone. That is how we have to treat finding someone else. It's that important. And if we're not willing to give that amount to it, then we defeated the entire purpose. And that's essentially what Malchut is. Malchut is being able to be humble. Being able to say, I am not the end-all, be-all of the universe. I am not everything. Actually, at best case, I'm only half of the quintessential person of myself. At best case. So I have to go search for the other half. And that's the only way that I can become whole. Even if it's in a selfish way, it's the only way that I can become whole is by searching for the other half. And then the worst part is when you have the other half in your life, when you're married and you have that other half in your life, and you're still not able to fully experience that because you have all your defense mechanisms up, because you've been pushing each other's buttons, because you've gotten into this vicious cycle. And that's when we say Malchut, hard reset, check your ego at the door. If you're not willing to check your ego at the door, this relationship is not going to work.
Yeah, but what happens when just one of the two checks your ego at the door?
Then it's not a relationship.
It's not a relationship.
It's not a relationship. But you have to call it.
How do you make the other person
You have to
understand?
call it and say.
Can
You
you
can
really
say
do that?
it's an amazing thing and I've seen it so many times with couples sitting across the table from me. I say, just say it. Say, we have been in a vicious cycle. We have not treated each other nicely. Do we want to continue this or do we want to change? What?
I think it's time.
You have to be willing. Do we want? But it's also you start off by saying what is. Say what is. We've been in a vicious cycle. It's okay. We once were in love. We once did have a relationship. But right now we've been in a vicious cycle. And really what I want is I want that to change. And you want that to change. Well, you can't say use. No, only iMessages.
That's it. Sometimes if you exhibit a contracting of your ego, it stimulates in the other person. So, but if you truly do that and the other person doesn't, they keep sort of, then the process is kind of not working at that time,
yeah.
right? Maybe it'll work at another time.
And there's something very very holistic about that. Two people sitting and saying, yes, this is where we are right now. And we need to make the process of changing. It's not working. That's the beginning. That we know what isn't, so let's figure out what is. And that's how Malchut kind of fits into the entire picture. Because then you find the humility in each and every aspect of your life. You can then go very compartmentalized. You can say there's humility in my conception, and there's humility in my conceptualization, and there's humility in my application, and there's humility in my loving kindness, and there's humility in my severity, and there's humility in my bonding, and there's humility in every single element and aspect of my life. There's humility. In every part of my life, I approach everything by checking my ego at the door. It's tough. It's hard. We'll become vulnerable, and we may get stepped on, and we may have people taking advantage of. But at least we walked into each situation in our lives being the best whole self that we can be. And that's amazing. And that's our thought for today.
Strange.